Joint forces put off Houthi fire sources in different areas of Hodeidah. Revisiting Stockholm Agreement after 3 years. Six-year war shatters lives of thousands of Yemenis. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shaza Abdelbey. Joint forces thwarted an infiltration attempt by the Houthi militia into Haita frontier south of Hodeidah. Military source said the joint forces clashed with armed Houthi militants who were infiltrated the front lines of the fighting fronts east of the city. Sources confirmed the joint forces thwarted the infiltration attempt bravely, and it caused deaths and injuries among the militia. Further joint forces identified and put out Houthi fire sources targeting residential areas south of Hodeidah. Military source said that the militia targeted residential areas in Hais, Al-Tuhaita, Al-Jabaliya, and Al-Fazza with medium and heavy weapons. Sources confirmed the joint forces identified the sources and directed focus strikes towards the area, inflicting massive losses on the militia. Still in Hodeidah, Houthi rebels bombed Al-Jah south of Hodeidah with artillery fire. Sources said the militia shelled people's houses and farms with mortar missiles in an escalation of attacks since the announcement of the United Nations ceasefire truce. 3 years now since Stockholm Agreement was signed, some political observers thought it was real breakthrough. However, it turned to be a complete failure with instant Houthi violations. This report looks back at the agreement.
On December 2018, the United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres attended the conclusion of the Stockholm Agreement. The agreement was comprised of 3 subsidiary arrangements: the Hodeidah Agreement, the Prisoners' Deal, and the half-page Taiz Understanding. The Hodeidah Agreement, which was backed by the UN Security Council Resolutions 2451, 2018 and 2452, 2019, contained several issues with a 3-week timeline, including an immediate ceasefire, redeployment, not withdrawal of forces, the formation of a UN-led redeployment coordination committee, removal of fortifications and halt of military reinforcements, demining of Hodeidah port, not the city, a strengthened UN presence, and security and economic measures. The agreement resulted from external pressure, and the process was rushed that parties did not sign it, while external actors such as the US were instrumental in pushing the parties to sign the deal. They did not provide much in the implementation phase. The Stockholm Agreement set an ambitious, if not impossible, timeline for the redeployment. The bigger problem was, however, that it required the ports to be handed over to local Yemeni forces in accordance with the Yemeni law. Now, while the vague nature of this provision might have been a deliberate choice at the time of the conclusion of the agreement in order to bring about a momentum in the peace process, it remained a sticking point. Why? Because the concept of local security forces touches upon the critical issues of legitimacy and sovereignty. The government and the Houthi rebels interpreted this clause profoundly differently. For the government, local security forces meant the pre-war security structure, while the Houthis rebel understood local security forces as their own personnel. In reality, the pre-war security system in Hodeidah is hardly existent anymore, given the Houthis rebels' deep penetration into the security system as well as the establishment of their own supervisory system. Hodeidah is a prime example of rebel governance in the making. The text of the Stockholm Agreement required the UNMHA to monitor the implementation of the agreement, which was subject to competing interpretations by the conflict parties. Lastly, political commitment to implement the Hodeidah ceasefire was notably weak, if not entirely absent. The Houthi rebels fired at the mission and tried to repress their work in every way. Violations occurred on a daily basis. In the end, and after 3 years of this deal, one might call this the monitoring of a war rather than of a ceasefire.
Houthi militias stormed the UN medical clinic in Hodeidah and looted a number of COVID-19 vaccines. Local sources said that the Houthis' chief of security in Hodeidah by armed elements broke into the UN staff clinic and looted a number of vaccines. The sources added that the Houthi militants prevented UN officials by force from taking their shots. Worth mentioning, the Yemeni government team in Hodeidah asked to move the UN mission to neutral locations to ensure they assume their duties without pressures. To Ma'rib, government forces backed by local fighters liberated strategic positions in the western fronts of the city. After clashing with Houthi militias, government forces forced the Houthis to flee, leaving behind a number of casualties and destroyed vehicles. Along with that, the Arab coalition jets carried out airstrikes targeting groups and reinforcements of Houthis in the outskirts of Ma'rib, causing casualties and destruction of equipment. An ongoing 6-year war has led to a humanitarian crisis in which thousands of Yemenis are left with no basic life needs.
It is a protracted war that had nothing to give but the loss of lives and dignity. Throughout more than 6 years of war, civilians have suffered the most from killing, displacement, lack of basic necessities, and interruption of livelihoods. According to the United Nations figures, conflict in Yemen has killed nearly 250,000. Among those, more than 130,000 were killed from indirect causes, such as lack of food, health services, and other causes. It's indeed the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. Around 21 million are in need of humanitarian aid, including more than 11 million children. The country is becoming a hell for the civilians who face multiple causes of fear and concern. In Ma'rib alone, the United Nations said that 1 million are internally displaced because of escalating fighting. Some others put the numbers at 4 million. The Yemenis could face another grim situation because of the standstill in Hodeidah, the gate to most basic humanitarian aid to the country. Adding to the woes of people, 16 million of Yemenis are suffering from hunger. 4 out of 5 Yemenis are getting alive, that is under the poverty line. Many families, in fact, are in a desperate situation with a falling economy and their inability to scratch even the basics. The war economy was behind the interruption of salaries and livelihoods. This blocked many Yemenis from accessing food, education, or even sanitation. And now, it is the time for the world and for the Yemenis themselves to act in order to end the horrible situation caused by the conflict and which is continued by the hands of the Houthis.
6 were killed in confrontation between the Muslim Brotherhood militia. Our correspondent reported that the clashes started between a deputy director of police station and an officer due to a dispute over land west of the city. He added that the clashes resulted in the death of both individuals and 4 others. Coming next, International Immigration Organization, 20 million Yemenis in need for medical aid.
بأي حق الحوثي يقصف علينا هنا على منازلنا وإحنا نازحين بأي حق؟ هذا ولا بحق الإنسانية.
يجينا الأمم المتحدة يجينا على هذا الدمار والخراب. الآن أصبحنا بلا مأوى. فين نروح؟ الحوثة لم يخلونا ننام ولا نستقر. في بيوتنا.
بأي ذنب يقتلوا الأطفال والنساء وهم في بيوتهم آمنين؟ يا أصحاب المصيرة الشيطانية اتقوا الله في الناس.
Years of conflict have a devastating effect on the children who were forced out of their schools due to poverty and lack of education.
The war in Yemen has taken away the childhood of thousands of boys and girls and destroyed their chances to live in a sustainable peace community. Grave violations against children are alarmingly increasing, while the COVID-19 pandemic increased the children's vulnerability to recruitment and abduction. A campaign was launched on Twitter under the hashtag #ChildrenNotGuns to support children in Yemen and to address the global conscience to pressure the Houthis to end the flagrant violations against childhood. According to UNICEF, armed groups are required by international humanitarian law to take measures to protect civilians, including children who are particularly vulnerable during times of war. Civilians must never be the target of attacks. According to the United Nations report, the attacks on hospitals and schools remain excessively high. Schools are being used for military purposes, as the temporary closure of schools during the pandemic made them easy targets for military occupation and usage. In the end, children need to be given an alternative to violence and abuse. They need peace, respect for child rights, and democracy. Officials need to act to build a future where peace prevails. Please give children that alternative.
An early start for the year school in near government-controlled areas. A decision comes after a year that was affected by the pandemic, where the Ministry of Education looks forward to improve what the students missed in the previous year. This report has more details.
Oddly, the new date for the school calendar 2021-2022 is set to start earlier than the usual date of the past year, as the Ministry of Education decided to start the academic year on the 15th of August.
The decision comes for several reasons, the first of which is that last year the world faced the corona pandemic, which negatively affected the education process, and that students didn't obtain rights to education. The ministry decided to start the school calendar earlier so that teachers would be able to give students the opportunity to review lessons that would help them with the upcoming academic levels.
Opinions vary, as some believe that the decision might affect the educational attainment of students at various levels. However, officials in the Ministry of Education stands with the decision.
The decision came suddenly, but we were ready for the decision as we had prior expectations, and we also expected that this decision will be in the interest of the educational process. It is true that the decision may seem surprising and quick to parents, but we are confident that it will be a right decision. Starting the school calendar earlier is a right decision because in the past year we faced many difficulties and pressures.
A different and early time frame for the new academic year that calls for directing all educational staff to seize this opportunity and work to invest it in a way that serves the educational process.
Me, as a parent for one of the students, I totally agree with the decision of the Ministry of Education to set the new date of the school calendar, as it is in the interest of our children.
This decision comes with hopes of achieving excellence, success, and educational attainment, as the previous year was affected severely by the war and the spread of COVID-19 pandemic.
International immigration organizations warns that 20 million Yemenis are without medical care. Health facilities have been destroyed because of this war. This report has more details.
Facing different kinds of problems, the Yemeni people try hard to cope. War, famine, poverty, and the COVID-19 pandemic, all of these contribute to make Yemen the worst humanitarian crisis in the whole world. The Yemenis are still suffering, with the International Organization of Migration saying that more than 20 million in the country are in need of adequate health care. The IOM said that it is continuing to support healthcare facilities and is sending mobile teams across Yemen. The country is virtually struggling with less than half of its health facilities, and those that are in operation lack specialists, equipment, and basic medicines. The more troubling is that access to clean water and awareness of hygiene principles are not present, especially in remote areas. For the latter, the UN organization affirmed that it conducted house-to-house visits, especially in displacement camps, to raise awareness for disease prevention. COVID-19 pandemic came to aggravate the health situation in an already suffering country. As a new wave of the pandemic hits Yemen, more than 700 deaths were reported between January and March. The country lacks testing, treatment, and has low vaccine supply, which makes the situation more acute. No one in Yemen can avoid the deterioration of healthcare, even children, with the IOM recording that at least one Yemeni child is dying every 10 minutes, and the cause could be prevented. With all of these figures in sight, now the question is, what will the world do to ease the pain in Yemen?
Houthi militia prevented all currency exchange networks and companies from dealing or receiving remittance from 14 companies in Sana'a. The Money Exchange Association said that the central bank in Sana'a approved a complete ban on withdrawing any money transfer in the militia-controlled areas from 14 exchange companies, as the monetary split escalated after the Houthis prevented small-sized banknotes from circulation. The militia also moved back the official pumped original-sized banknotes to its controlled areas. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. Joint forces put off Houthi fire sources in different areas of Hodeidah. Revisiting Stockholm Agreement after 3 years. Six-year war shatters lives of thousands of Yemenis. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.